So today's video is going to be about text dependent multiple choice questions. And if you are one of my students going through my course, this is from our Unit 1 packet. So it's early in the year if you're doing this as part of my course. If you're doing this on YouTube, found it for Regents Review. This is helpful for that too. This is part of the Regents practices that I embed throughout the year. And I'm going to do these videos occasionally for multiple units throughout the year, in part to show that there are a bunch of questions every year on the Regents exam where you just need to use what they've given you. You have to understand the text. You have to compare the choices to the text. You have to know what the question's asking. And you can and should get the question right even if you don't know the social studies part of the question. You don't know the content. So I'm making this video. It's being filmed in June of 2025. It's late June. It's after the Regents exam. And in going through that Regents exam, there were like 13 to 15 questions that you should be able to get right that way. Meaning, you only need to get a handful of the remaining 15 to 13 questions in order to be all set up to do okay on the exam, if your goal is to pass, right? So the hope here is that as we do this throughout the year, or as you watch this video series, if you found it on YouTube, that you sort of get used to what is it asking and how can I set myself up to succeed, to at the very least narrow down the choices. So let's look at this first question. First, every single time you have a multiple choice question with a source, which on the Regents exam is every single one. First thing we're going to do is look at the sourcing information. Philip Ziegler, Decline and Fall of the Mughal Empire. Now, I'm not going to tell you what pops into my brain with Mughal Empire, but you're going through this video as we're covering in the course. Hopefully you saw Mughal Empire and you go, okay, we did really two chief things, and we'll talk about what they were later. Maybe that helps, maybe it doesn't. There's actually a second question in your packet that goes with this one that we're not going to go over here because it's not a text dependent question. We'll go over that one in class. So that's the source. Then we read the question. We're not going to read the choices. We're just going to read the question. Go through this habit every time. Most people are done with the exam with plenty of time to spare. So take your time on these questions. Based on this passage, okay, so here's where we know it doesn't matter. Is this answer a true historical statement or not? Now, they're not gonna be, okay? But you don't need to know that. You just need to know if, based on this passage, what was one cause of the collapse of the Mughal Empire? So why did it collapse? All right, so I'm gonna read through it. Normally, I'll probably just tell you to read it on your own just to save me some video time here, but I'm going to read through it. Follow along as I read. So you can read it on your screen, or if you're on your packet, I believe for my students, this is page 1 of your packet. The Mughals failed because they had little, if any, effort to drag India. They made little, if any, effort to drag India out of the Middle Ages. The Mughal Empire, writes Abraham Urele, lagged way behind Europe, behind even China, Japan, and Persia. There was hardly any vigor in the economy, scant spirit of enterprise among the people. In agriculture, industry, and trade, Indian practices were archaic or outdated. They'll give you a definition of a word that they think maybe you wouldn't know. There was no ferment of ideas. The Mughals were formidable conquerors, but inept or ineffectual governors. They did nothing to cure the endemic or native weaknesses of Indian society and added fresh economic burdens through the profligacy or extravagance of their courts and the cost of their military campaigns. So, if you are like me, you find it frustrating to have so many times, especially in the second half of this document, 4 times in 4 lines where they define a word for you in the middle of the text. It makes it kind of tough to read, granted. So there's a couple of things you could do. You could just ignore the first word. So you could say, if we go back up here, is this my disappearing ink? I think it is. Let's see if it is. You could go up here and it says Indian right here. So if you want to follow me, that is not the disappearing ink. Never mind. Maybe I don't have that on here. Regardless, Indian practices were outdated. Just don't even read that first part. It can make it a little easier for you. Okay, so based on this passage, what was one cause of the collapse of the Mughal Empire? One, an entrepreneurial spirit and rapid expansion of trade. Okay. Um, it says right here, I'll use that. There was scant spirit of enterprise amongst the people. Now, if you don't know what scant is, it means there was little. There was little spirit of enterprise. That doesn't seem like an entrepreneurial spirit, entrepreneurial enterprise. Um, and it says in trade, their practices were outdated. Doesn't seem like it's going to be one. Widespread rebellions by the common people across the empire. Okay, so one thing you don't see here is anything about rebellions, common people or otherwise, right? So we're not going to pick it because it says based on this passage. You cannot find any examples in this whole text of where they're talking about rebellions. The lack of trained military forces to protect against invasions. It doesn't talk about how well trained their military was. It doesn't talk about whether they're invaded or not, really. It says they were formidable conquerors, okay. The high costs of their military campaigns. That's it. That's the only mention of military. So it doesn't tell me how trained their forces were or whether they could or could not defend against invasion. So I'm not going to pick that one. So I have now eliminated 3. I probably know it's 4, but I'm not going to pick it because I'm going to read it and I'm going to check every single choice against the source. That is how to make sure that you get these right. If there are 13 questions like this on your Regents exam when you take it, you want to get at least 11 or 12 or all 13 right. So take your time. Take your time on the ones that you think are easy so that they actually are. Okay. Poor governing and excessive spending. So here's the deal. If you're reading a document like I did, and it was a little clunky, and we had all these parts where I was saying the multiple words, archaic, outdated, inept, ineffectual, profligacy, like holy cow. You get to the end and you're just like, your mind is swimming. Maybe you don't understand the source. Rather than read it all again, go through the choices, see if you can eliminate certain things. But then I want to point out a few things. See this here? See this here? Those are called ellipses. Those are called ellipses. What it means is there's more to that passage than what they included there. Okay? They took out part. So this is for your Regents exam. They edited part of this document. Why is that helpful to you right now? Well, the reason it's helpful is they made a choice. I'm going to get rid of that. And then I'm going to come back here and I'm going to show you. They decided to eliminate the sentence before this, but they made sure to leave this sentence in. Okay, they made sure to leave this sentence in. Whoops, why is that not there? There it is. Right, they made sure to leave that one in. They took out whatever was at the end, but they made sure to leave this last sentence in here. Okay? They didn't cut it off there. Man, this highlighting is going a little rough, but you get the point. Okay? So, we know we've eliminated the other 3. We think the answer is 4. But I want to point something out. After the ellipses, so always pay attention around there. Maybe you can, rather than read the whole source and waste time if you don't need to, look at the ellipses. The Mughals were formidable conquerors, but inept governors. Poor governing. Inept means you're really bad at something. You're ineffective. You're inept. If I were to, let's say, play basketball, you might call me inept. Not something I'm gonna like volunteer to do very often, right? So inept. They were inept governors. They were poor at governing, just like I'd be poor at playing basketball against someone who plays basketball. Okay, so that seems like it might be right. And then we look at the extravagance of their course and the cost of their military campaigns. Spending money, it sounds like. Excessive spending. Those sentences were kept in the document for a reason. They either provided context you needed or the information you needed to get the question. All right, so the answer to this one is 4. Poor governing and excessive spending. Wow, I'm having a rough time using a mouse pad, which maybe I will plug in an actual mouse here while we go get ready to skip to the next one. I would encourage you, what I can do also, for those of you that are on YouTube, who found this on YouTube for Regents review or for just review during your class, what I can do is I can post the document. I am a disaster dropping stuff here. Post a document that has these questions. It's not many questions, but it's from the packet, so you can follow along. You can answer questions. You can print it out if you wanted, but you could at least try the questions first, see how it goes, then watch the video. Might not be a bad thing to do from here on out. Probably would have been good if I had thought ahead of time to do that. But hey, let's go to the next set of questions. So now I think it's page 4 of your packet if you are one of my students. If not, it's just the next page if you printed it out of the link I shared on YouTube. Okay, so it says JSA, remember, we read the sourcing. JSA Alisanus, The Epic of Unification, 1568 to 1615, Japan Society Online. Okay, it's about Japan. What was the main reason for implementing the system described in this passage? Okay, so this one here, not entirely text dependent. Biggest reason we're going over this here is you can eliminate certain certain choices using some clues, right? And I actually would argue you could probably eliminate 3 of the choices just by using some textual clues and some test taking tips. Again, I point out the ellipses, so if you read the whole document and you're very confused, rather than reread the whole thing again as you're trying to answer questions, focus around the ellipses, these sentences they left in or took out. So the main reason for implementing the system described in this passage. Read along with me. The samurai constituted the governing class. For the most part, they were compelled to withdraw from the countryside to the castle town where they lived in segregated residential quarters. They retained the right to bear arms, something denied the other classes. The populace had been disarmed, settling one of the principal conflicts of the country at war. So the samurai held the monopoly on inflicting violence. Here, Hideyoshi laid down the design plan for the rigid class system that matured under his successor regime, the Tokugawa Shogunate, which lasted until the regime's fall in 1868. So this isn't entirely a text-dependent question, but I want to show you a couple things. First of all, you can still use the text to help you. We can outright eliminate. I'm going to show you choice 3, to allow social mobility. What is his reason for doing it? It literally says he laid down the design plan for a rigid class system. Rigid class system means no social mobility, right? Rigid class system means no social mobility. Let me see if this, nope, I'm having problems, is no social mobility. If you go back to Global 9, the caste system was a good example of that. No social mobility. So therefore, 3 is wrong. But you needed to know that rigid class structure is no social mobility. So now you do. The other thing I want to point out, think back to Global 9 again. You talked about cultural diffusion a lot probably, right? Exchange of goods and ideas between cultures. Well, we noticed that choices 1 and 2, kind of the same vibe. You're welcoming outsiders, which is going to lead to cultural exchanges. So these 2 are very similar in that regard. So if you're stuck and you can't figure out the answer, It's probably not going to be either of those because they're too similar. If you are welcoming outsiders, you're probably promoting cultural exchanges. It just that always happens anytime two cultures come in contact with each other. So therefore they can't both be right, so the odds are neither of them is right. So now I've just used test taking tips and the text to leave me with one choice. Now I'm going to read that choice. Establish power and authority. First of all, kind of generic, but they're establishing the power. Only the samurai could have weapons or inflict violence or something. They said they held a monopoly on inflicting violence. So there we go. Um, so, I mean, 4 is the correct answer here, but I also want to point something else out. If you're going through this as we go through the year, word association, okay? And this is something I'll tell you when we review for the Regents. I'm going to tell you Tokugawa. You should think one word when you see Tokugawa, just word association. As soon as you see it in the document, I would encourage you to make sure what is happening. There we go. I would encourage you to just kind of have this in your back pocket, right? You see Tokugawa, you think isolate. Well, that's not welcoming outsiders. If I'm isolating myself, I'm not welcoming outsiders. If I'm isolating myself, I don't want to exchange ideas with outsiders, with other people. So that's another way, just knowing that they laid the groundwork that the Tokugawa follow. They're the isolation people. So again, eliminate this one. And that should bring you, hopefully, back to choice 4 once again. Okay, let's go and do, okay, it says, I know it says questions 2 and 3 here. It says 3 and 4 here. I've changed that by the time you've printed out your packets. At least I hope. I haven't changed it yet because I just noticed it minutes ago. But this one is question 2. I realize, of course, that in the grand scheme of the packet, it is not question 2. But I just wanted my directions. What is happening? What just happened? I am very confused. I'm going to pause this video in a second. Oh, never mind. We're back. Okay. Well, that's questions 2 and 3. I'm not going to try that again. That's 2. This here. This question's 2. This question's 3. Again, if you printed it out, it should be fixed by now, but it wasn't when I created this file for this video. Okay, modern East Asia is the source. I don't know anything about the source. I don't know anything about the authors. It's 2004. I'm going to go ahead and guess that as a result that this is a secondary source. That doesn't mean these events happened in 2004. It's probably a secondary source. So the first question says, a historian would find this passage most useful for understanding the, and then which claim can best be supported by this passage? Both of these questions are text dependent. You don't need to know if something is true or not true. You just need to say, does the passage talk about this? Okay, so I'm going to read through the sources again. To see to it that the daimyo obeyed bakufu, or shogunate orders, the shogun, and for the rest of this, I'm going to not read the original word. I'm going to read the word in brackets, okay? So the shogun had his own inspectors. He also kept the daimyo under surveillance by requiring them to spend alternate years in residence in Edo. When they returned to their domains, they had to leave their wives and children behind. This system of alternate attendance, Sanken Kotai, which I hope I pronounced at least closely, forced the daimyo to spend large sums traveling back and forth with their attendants and to maintain suitably elaborate residencies in Edo. They were also called on to support public projects such as waterworks or the repair of the shogun's castle at Edo, but such demanded contributions were not as burdensome as the constant expense of alternate attendance. This requirement turned Edo into the capital not only of the Bakufu, but of all Japan. So, this historian would find this passage most useful for understanding the obligations of the daimyo under the Tokugawa shogun. Okay, an obligation is like a requirement. That's an obligation. You're obligated to do something. I mean, they did talk about the stuff they have to do. They have to do the alternate attendance thing. They had to spend alternate years in Edo. They had to support public projects. So maybe The design of public projects in the Tokugawa period. I bet if you've gone and done this in your packet, or if you did it before you watched this part of the video, some people pick this because they do talk about public projects, but they're not talking about the design of them. I don't know nothing about the design. I just know these projects existed here, okay? Inspections conducted by the daimyo during the Tokugawa period doesn't talk anything about that. The inspectors, it's the shogun had his own inspectors. So they made sure that the shogun's orders were followed. That had nothing to do with the daimyo, though. They weren't conducted by the daimyo. And then foreign policy concerns of the Tokugawa shogun. Okay, they were the ones who, again, Tokugawa isolate. But this isn't talking about that at all, right? This isn't talking about that at all. You don't need to apply your outside knowledge to this. It says, how would a historian find this useful? If it doesn't mention foreign policy, then this document is not useful for showing that. If it's not showing me the designs of these public projects, then it's not helpful for understanding the design of the public projects. It's not helpful in understanding the inspections that were conducted. It's not doing that, right? So it doesn't help me understand this. Therefore, the obligations or the requirements of the daimyo, the answer is 1. And which claim is best supported by this passage? Again, it is not asking you which of these things is true. It is asking you which is supported by this information. So if this passage doesn't say anything about a certain topic, guess what? Not it. Okay? So which claim regulations established by the shogun limited the size of Edo? I don't think it really limited the size of Edo at all. It doesn't really talk about that in any way whatsoever, right? The primary role of the daimyo was keeping the shogun under surveillance. The shogun wanted to keep an eye on the daimyo, the nobles of Japan, right? Service to the shogun often required personal sacrifice. Okay. Interesting. I would like to point out, but such demanded contributions, so first of all, demand, were not as burdensome. It was a burden. This is a burden to them. They were required. They had to spend a large sum. They were forced to spend large sums. That seems like a personal sacrifice to me. Being forced, required, demanded contributions, burdensome. These are sacrifices. And the daimyo and the shogun were equal partners. So again, even if you couldn't tell me for sure 3 was right, the other 4 make no sense. Clearly the passage says the opposite. The shogun calls the shots, right? So 4 is right out. Keeping the shogun under surveillance, opposite. He was keeping an eye on them. And there's nothing in the passage about number 1. So even if you didn't figure out that personal sacrifice one was right, it's right there. Okay? Again, I point out the ellipses. So let's say you read this whole passage and you were like, oh boy, I am not sure about this document. You go back and let's read from here. They were also called on to support public projects, repair the shogun's castle, but such demanded contributions were not as burdensome as the constant expense. Boy, that sure sounds like some sort of sacrifice here. I am serving the shogun, but it is at great cost to me. Therefore, it's right. So again, just pay attention to that sometimes, and it can help you focus on the right part of a document. Okay, next time we'll look at some other different categories of questions as we go through, again, these text-dependent questions where we want to try to get 90-something% of those right, if not 100% of those right, when you take your Global Regents exam.